We're in a series called Finding God When You Need Him the Most. And today we're going to talk about finding God in the midst of a crisis. And I don't know whether you're in the middle of one or someone you love is in the middle of one, but crises are the kind of things that shape your entire life. They're literally a crossroads that they can be relational, they can be financial, they can be you lose your job, you lose your house. They can be things are going great and a biopsy report comes back and you have cancer or your wife has cancer or one of your kids has cancer. It can be a phone call in the middle of the night that a drunk driver went left to center and they need you right now because someone you love is in ICU. It can be the report that mom or dad who seemed to be doing so well now has Alzheimer's. And you're trying to figure out, we can't hardly make it financially and what are we going to do because they need to be in some sort of assisted living center. It can be one of your kids tells you something that you thought you would never hear out of their mouth and your world crumbles. And whether it's just a temporary crisis or one of those that may take you through a season that you never dreamed you would have to go through, God wants to meet you in the midst of a crisis. The question is, how do you find Him? How do you experience Him in the midst of a crisis? On the front of your notes, I ask two important questions that I want us to look at. Because the question in life is not, will we go through difficult times? You will be disappointed. You will be betrayed. Difficult, painful things will happen to you and happen to me. It's a fallen world. The question is, how will we go through those kind of times? I listed some of the ways that I have gone through them in the past that were not very helpful. I've gone through them alone. I've gone through them with a stiff upper lip, like, you know what? Okay, all right. I can handle this, which I did not. I've gone through them where I literally was crushed under the weight of a crisis. There's times where you just give up. Give up on a relationship, give up on a family, give up on a job. For some people, you give up on you. Don't take care of yourself anymore. You find yourself medicating yourself with food or drugs or alcohol or work or success or something or hobbies. Or you go into denial. It's not that bad. And just keep pushing down the real issues and the lights are flashing everywhere and people who love you are telling you, you got to address this and you can't or you won't. Or I've met people that had a crisis, and when they talk about it, it sounds like it happened yesterday, and you realize the person walked out on them 20 years ago, and they're still bitter, and they're still resentful, and they don't realize that they have swallowed the poison of unforgiveness, and their life, the crisis comes. The Chinese talk about crisis has two properties. They talk about it when a crisis comes into your life, it's a tragedy or an opportunity, and your choice and how you respond will make all the difference in the world. In fact, for many, they look back on a crisis was the turning point in their life that led them on a new path that was the greatest thing that happened. And they look back on a tragedy or a difficulty because it's almost like they were blind and now they see. Webster defines a crisis like this: a difficult or dangerous situation that needs serious attention. I like that, serious attention. It's a turning point, for better or for worse. You can go through it that way, or we can experience the peace and the power of God in ways that one could never imagine. I encourage you, jot those two words down, because that is God's will and God's desire. That in the midst of a crisis, not later, not somehow, you would experience His peace and His power. And to learn how to do that, we're going to look at one of the most familiar Psalms. I mean, those of us that didn't grow up in church, that never read the Bible, even I heard of this one growing up. Psalm 23, right? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. I mean, almost everybody knows that. But what you may not understand is it's not pretty poetry, and it was never intended to be on little plaques in Christian bookstores and windowsills. This is a man who'd been through crisis. As a young teenager, he killed a giant. Afterwards, he was betrayed by his boss. Beyond that, he was dodging spears and had to hide out in caves and was running for his life for 10 years. He knows relationship crisis because he knew what it was like to have a woman that he loved and be on the run and then his wife be married to someone else. He knew what it was like to be betrayed where, he went out on a raid and came back and his wife and his family and all the other guys, they were carried off and his own men decided, I think what we'll do is we'll just kill David because he really blew it. He knew what it was like in a weak moment when he was more successful than he could have ever imagined to look down from a balcony and see a very beautiful woman without clothes on and call her up to his bedroom. And then out of his guilt, try and figure out how to get rid of the evidence. And so he commits adultery with her and kills her husband. And then he lives with that guilt for a year until confronted. There's all kind of crises. Some we make ourselves, some other people bring on us, and some we're just in a fallen world. But David knows about how to deal with the crisis. And God wants you to know he wants to meet you on this day in this room to show you why David could have confidence and you can have confidence. But there's a couple things you need to learn. Number one, when a Hebrew would read this in David's time or later in the first century, a Hebrew would read this, it would be like, in color, neon lights. Wow, you've got to be kidding. I get it. For most of us, it's sort of, I went to a memorial service, went to a funeral, guy opened the Bible, the Lord is my shepherd, So you need to understand a little bit about shepherds, a little bit about sheep, so you get this. The second thing you need to do is you need to understand the structure of this. There's 3 statements he makes of confidence in the midst of crisis. He says, I shall not be in want. So he's going to say the fear of unmet needs, of what's going to happen in terms of, am I going to get taken care of psychologically and emotionally and physically? He's going to say, hey, that's covered. And then he's going to talk about the fear of the unknown. When you're in crisis, it's dark. What about this? What about that? What am I going to do with the kids? What medical treatments are we supposed to do? I don't have a job now. We just lost our house. What do you do with the fear of the unknown? He's going to address that. And then for all of us in crisis, one of the nagging issues is what about the future, the fear of the future? And when fear grips your heart, you can get paralyzed. And when you're paralyzed, you do one of 2 things or 3 things, is you make some of the stupidest decisions and mistakes that you'll ever make, or you get paralyzed and you do nothing. And that's a big decision. Doing nothing is a decision. And so he's going to address all those things. Follow along. Let's just kind of read it to get the feel, then I'll show you the structure, and then we're going to learn about sheep, shepherds, and then we're going to hear where the Holy Spirit's going to teach us in the midst of your crisis, or your mate's crisis, or your roommate's crisis, or one of your kids, or one of your friends, or your boss' crisis. Here's how you can find peace and power. Actually find God. It's so personal. I'd like, if you have a pen, to pull it out. And as you do, what I'd like you to do is the personal pronouns, I want you to sense how intimate this is. So the word my or mine or I, circle them as I read it. David would write in the midst of an overwhelming crisis in his life, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness. Why? For his name's sake. And even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Declaration, surely goodness and love will follow. Literally the word is pursue. Will pursue me all the days of my life. Statement, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Would you underline the phrase, I shall not be in want? Skip down to verse 4, I will fear no evil. Underline that. And underline, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This is his unshakable confidence in the midst of, in our day, cancer, betrayal, lost job, Alzheimer's, pain, kid gone wayward. Someone walks out on you. Financial loss. Now, I'm just guessing for a lot of us, you're thinking, I'm glad this really helped him, but that little thing that you read, it's not like bells aren't going off like, oh, wow, fantastic. So I want you to put a box around the word Lord, L-O-R-D. Did you notice they're all capitalized? When the translators do that, they're translating God's covenant name, Yahweh, or you might write Jehovah. The Hebrews felt God was so holy, they wouldn't even write his whole name out, and they would just put 4 letters, Y-W, Y-W. And this was revealed to Moses. It's the to be verb. I am that I am. I'm the everlasting one. I'm the self-existent one. I'm the all-knowing one. I'm the all-powerful one. I'm the creator. There's no one before me and no one after. It's this majestic, personal, awesome God. And then he says this awesome God is my shepherd. So put a little circle around the word shepherd, because for the Hebrew mind it would have been, what? This awesome, great, powerful creator who speaks and the world's come into existence. Well, a shepherd was the lowliest job on the totem pole. I mean, remember when they were trying to find a king? And they went to Jesse's house and he had all these brothers? And there was one, the youngest brother wasn't around. What was he doing? David. He's out tending the sheep. Why? Because if you're the youngest, you get the rotten job. When I was a kid, I was the youngest. Guess my job? Take out the garbage. Right? When my kids, they came, guess what the youngest job was? You take out the garbage. Sheep are dirty. Sheep are smelly. Sheep have a lot of problems. Sheep not only have a lot of problems, but when you're the shepherd, you're out all night with them, and it's cold. And you only had 2 resources. You would have what was called the rod. It would be 2.5, 3 feet, and had a ball on the end, either metal or real hard. And you would learn, and they had a lot of time on their hands with those sheep. And I mean, it was a weapon, and they learned how to throw that. Man, they could knock out a lion, a bear. And then they had a staff, like in the Christmas cards, you have the shepherds. And what that was used for, oh boy, this sheep again, he's getting off the path and he's in the thicket, and they would reach down, and it was to comfort and direct. And so David is saying, Yahweh, the majestic God of all the earth, wants to have a deep, intimate relationship. Because the other thing about sheep is they knew the shepherd's voice. A shepherd, to this day, knows the name of every sheep. Like in my house, I don't have any sheep, but when I say Ranger, my dog actually knows his name. He picks up his ears, come here, and he comes. Sheep can actually, they learn their name. And someone else can come and call their name, they won't come. In fact, one author, Philip Keller, wrote a classic book. And the classic book is called A Shepherd Looks at the 23rd Psalm. And he spent all these years being a shepherd in Australia. And then he looked at this passage with fresh eyes. And here's the research on this. This is what sheep are like. They are slow, defenseless, stupid, easily frightened, not clean, and they can't find food or water on their own. Can you imagine? This is an animal that God has made that, how do they defend themselves? Literally. Sheep, there's no such thing as a wild sheep. There's not. It's a domesticated animal. A sheep, if you leave them right here, they'll eat all the grass, then they'll eat the roots, and they'll stay right there, and they'll die. And you can't drive sheep. You have to lead them. So once they eat that much grass, if someone doesn't lead them to fresh grass, they die. Sheep won't find water on their own. They're so skittish and so frightened. Literally, if a jackrabbit jumps out of the thicket, it can cause a stampede. If a sheep is thirsty, now imagine other animals. I think bears are like, oh, kind of, man, I'm getting some water here. If there's like a brook that's babbling that's too loud, the shepherd would have to go up 30, 40, 50 feet, and he would make a little dam and create a pool of water when he says beside quiet waters, because the sheep won't come near water even though they're thirsty. Now, so far, this is not a really good picture of these stupid sheep. Now, here's the other part. They're probably the most valuable, the most vulnerable, but the most valuable. They were food, they were clothes, and they were wealth. And so it was the most valuable. How many sheep I have told me how wealthy I am. And I would shear the sheep every year, and so it's this picture of God saying to us, and please don't take this too personally, especially if you're new, you're sheep. your sheep. Sheep have a tendency to, I'm sure this really isn't really true of us, but sheep have a tendency to be very competitive and fight one another. And so the shepherd would actually take olive oil and put some spices and things with it and rub it on their eyes, because unlike a horse, they can't take their tail and get the flies and parasites away and all the stuff that gets around them. So they put extra oil on their heads so that when they fight, they would kind of glance off each other and not get hurt. In other words, a sheep needs constant attention. Sheep minus shepherd equals dead. And David is saying, the almighty maker and creator of all that there ever was, all that there ever is, and all that there ever will be, he's my personal shepherd. Therefore, I won't have needs that don't get met. And then he talks about, well, what kind of needs? He says, he makes me lie down in green pastures. What would happen is there's different seasons as you would shepherd sheep. And so in the spring and summertime, the grass would be here. And then as the seasons changed and it would get hot, you would take the sheep up to a plateau where the grass would be green because they're wearing this out. And they would take them through, if you've ever been to Israel, there would be these ravines and mountains. Well, then there's dark and shadows everywhere, and that's where the cougars and the lions would be. And Philip Keller said, in all my years shepherding, I never saw a lion or a cougar. But I lost scores and scores and scores of sheep. Because it's in the darkness they would pray, and the little sheep that would wander this way or that way, bam, got them, killed, drag them off before you'd even see them. And so David is using this picture to talk about who God is and what he wants to provide. So his physical needs, what does God do? He makes you lie down in green pastures, and then he leads you beside quiet waters. God wants you to know, I'll take care of your physical needs in the midst of it. Stay close to me. He says, I want to take care of your spiritual and your personal needs. He restores my soul. He's saying here, I want to bring peace to your heart and your life, even in the midst of the crisis. And then finally, he says, he guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And literally, you might just say right path or God's path. And so as you look at your notes, I shall not be in want. Why? Because the shepherd provides all my needs. And for some of us, that's hard to believe. David said, in the midst of all the crises, the betrayal, the loss of my wife, the threatening of my life, my own sin, the Lord is my shepherd, and he will meet my physical needs, he'll meet my emotional needs, he'll meet my spiritual needs, and even in the midst of all the crisis and all the chaos, if I will allow him to be my shepherd, he'll give me peace and a soul that is at rest, even in the midst of it. Did you notice the purpose clause? Why? Certainly it's because he loves you, but for his name's sake. See, you are little Christ. Those of you in the room that are followers of Jesus, he lives inside of you. His spirit dwells inside of you. And we have crises just like the world. And many of your friends and many of your relatives, they watch how do you respond when you lose your job? How do you respond when you're clinically depressed? How do you respond when you've got parents that you need to take care of and you have some kids in college and you're looking at, I don't have the resources. How am I going to make this? How do you respond when you get a raw deal at work? How do you respond when one of your kids is in a crisis? And see what God says, I want to be your shepherd, and I want to help you. I want to give you unexplainable grace and peace and power and provision in ways where as you do that, people would understand how real that I am. Now, some sheep are more hard-headed. Little lambs, you can spot them early, right? Anybody have kids that, it was like some of the kids were really compliant and some were like, man, he can't even talk, and he's going, right? I apparently have been one of those kind of kids. And here's what a shepherd would do, because if you're not near, when a lamb would stray off, early on, you take the big staff and, a little tap on the rear, come on over here. And he kept straying off, no, over here. And, after a while, you realize that lamb straying off is going to die. I mean, if it gets completely separated, it can't get food, it can't get water, and there's a predator. So here's what a shepherd did, and they still do to this day. You take that lamb that says, I'm going to live my way. I'm going to make my path, not your path. I think I don't need a shepherd. That's kind of what little lambs say. If there's any parallel to our lives, you can figure that out. I don't know. But so he would get the little lamb, and he'd break its leg on purpose. Then he would splint the leg. Then he takes the lamb, and he puts it on his shoulders. And then all the shepherding, he keeps the lamb on his shoulders, and he walks around. Now, this lamb is hearing the shepherd's voice like no one else because it's very close. This lamb is watching what's going on. Well, sort of like this, I suppose, but he's watching everything that's going on. And then over a period of time, this lamb knows the shepherd's voice, and when you think about it, this lamb has the most intimate, constant contact with the shepherd of any of the sheep. A bond gets created that's even stronger than all the others. When it heals, he puts the lamb down, and he would get a little rope and put a bell around this particular lamb. And it's called the bell sheep. This little lamb that's grown up a little bit now, guess where it wants to be all the time? Right here. Shepherd goes here. Shepherd goes here. So when all the other sheep hear the bell, what do they know? They know that's where the shepherd is. That's where the shepherd is.